The relentless Kansas sun beat down on the cracked earth, baking the dust into a fine powder that coated everything in a uniform sepia tone. Jonathan John Riley, a man whose face was as weathered as the landscape he called home, squinted against the glare. His horse, a sturdy mare named Daisy, snorted softly, her intelligent eyes reflecting the vast, indifferent sky. They were miles from their small homestead, exploring a remote corner of the prairie known for its unusual rock formations. John had always been drawn to this place. There was a stillness here, a profound quiet broken only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional cry of a hawk. But today, something felt different. Daisy, usually so placid, was agitated. She kept shifting her weight, her ears swiveling, and a low whinny rumbled in her chest. John patted her neck, his calloused hand seeking to soothe her unease. "Easy there, girl," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "What's got you spooked?" He followed her gaze. Her eyes were fixed on a colossal, weathered boulder that stood like a sentinel on a low rise. It was a peculiar rock, larger than any he'd seen in the area, its surface pitted and scarred by centuries of wind and rain. But it wasn't just its size that caught his attention. As he drew closer, he saw them, faint, almost imperceptible markings etched into the stone. They weren't natural erosion patterns. They looked deliberate, like symbols, worn by time into near invisibility. A strange feeling washed over John. It wasn't fear, but a deep, primal curiosity, a tugging sensation in his gut that told him these markings meant something. Daisy nudged his hand with her nose, then pawed the ground insistently, her gaze never leaving the giant rock. It was as if she understood, as if the very earth was speaking to them both. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry grass. He ran his fingers over the markings. They felt rough, ancient. He traced them, trying to decipher their meaning, but they remained stubbornly cryptic. Daisy whickered again, and this time John felt a conviction settle upon him. These weren't just random scratches. They were a sign, a message from the past. And something deep within him, a feeling he couldn't quite explain, urged him to dig. He looked around, searching for anything that might help. He had his shovel in his saddlebag, but the ground around the boulder seemed as hard as iron. Still, Daisy's behavior, the unsettling familiarity of the markings, the sheer immensity of the rock, it all coalesced into a singular purpose. He had to know what lay beneath. He cinched Daisy's reins to a sturdy clump of sagebrush, the desert plant releasing its sharp, pungent aroma into the air. With a determined sigh, John retrieved his shovel. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the prairie, making the world seem a little more mysterious, a little more alive. He hefted the shovel, its weight familiar and comforting in his hands, and approached the base of the giant rock. The earth here was stubborn, unyielding, but John Riley was not a man easily deterred. The digging was backbreaking work. The Kansan soil, baked hard by the sun, resisted every thrust of John's shovel. Sweat beaded on his brow, trickling into his eyes, stinging them with the salt of his exertion. Daisy, tethered nearby, watched with a patience that belied her earlier agitation. Periodically, she would let out a soft whinny, a sound that seemed to urge him on, as if she too sensed the importance of his task. John paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his dusty glove. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. The air, once scorching, was beginning to cool, a welcome relief. He looked at the shallow indentation he'd made, a pathetic attempt against the sheer immensity of the task ahead. Doubts began to creep in. What was he even doing? Chasing shadows, listening to the fanciful nudges of a horse. But then his gaze fell again on the markings on the boulder. They seemed to deepen in the fading light, almost as if they were absorbing the last rays of the sun. And Daisy nudged his arm again, her soft muzzle insistent. He felt a strange kinship with his mare, a silent understanding that transcended words. She knew this place, or at least something about it more than he did. He leaned on his shovel, catching his breath. The quiet of the prairie descended, thick and profound. It was in these moments of stillness that John often felt most connected to the land, to its history, to the unspoken stories held within its vastness. He remembered his father, a man of few words but immense wisdom, telling him that the land always remembers. He decided to try a different approach. Instead of digging randomly, he focused on the area directly beneath the most prominent markings. Daisy seemed to approve, standing a little straighter, her ears perked. John took a deep breath and plunged the shovel into the earth again. This time it felt different. The resistance was still there, but there was a subtle give, a hint of softer soil beneath the hardened crust. He dug with renewed vigor, the rhythm of his shovel against the earth becoming a steady beat in the encroaching twilight. He unearthed small stones, dried roots, and the skeletal remains of some long-forgotten creature. But he also found something else, a patch of darker, richer soil, distinctly different from the surrounding earth. It was moist, almost damp, a stark contrast to the parched surface. His heart quickened. This was it. This was what Daisy had sensed, what the markings had hinted at. He dug deeper, his muscles burning, his determination fueled by an excitement he hadn't felt in years. The hole grew, revealing more of the dark, moist soil. He could almost feel the secrets the earth was reluctant to yield. As the last vestiges of daylight faded, leaving the prairie bathed in the soft glow of emerging stars, John's shovel struck something hard. It wasn't a rock. It was flat, smooth, and yielded with a dull thud. His breath hitched. He carefully brushed away the loose soil with his hands, his fingers trembling with anticipation. The object was metallic, cold to the touch, and etched with patterns that mirrored yet were clearer than those on the boulder. He had found something significant. The night was a canvas of 1,000,000 stars, their brilliance undimmed by the artificial glow of civilization. John worked by the light of his flickering lantern, the small flame casting dancing shadows that exaggerated the contours of his determined face. Daisy lay down nearby, her soft breaths a calming presence in the vast silence. He had uncovered a large, flat metal plate, buried a few feet beneath the surface. The patterns etched into it were intricate, geometric, and seemed to hold a silent narrative. They weren't just decorative. They felt like a map, a key, or perhaps a warning. John carefully cleaned the entire surface, his heart thrumming with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The metal was unlike anything he'd ever seen, surprisingly resilient, showing no signs of rust or decay despite its time underground. As he worked, he noticed a faint seam running along one edge of the plate. He pressed it, prodded it, but it wouldn't budge. He ran his fingers over the etched symbols, his mind racing. The markings on the boulder, the strange soil, Daisy's unusual behavior, it all pointed to a deliberate act, a hidden treasure, or perhaps a forgotten secret. He decided to rest for a moment, leaning back against the cool, rough surface of the giant boulder. Daisy stirred, and then, with a surprising burst of energy, trotted over to the metal plate. She sniffed at it intently, then nudged a specific point on its surface with her nose. It was a small indentation, almost invisible to the human eye, nestled within a swirling pattern. John watched, fascinated. Daisy, his horse, was a creature of instinct and intuition. If she was pointing to this spot, it had to be important. He carefully examined the indentation. It was shaped like a small, rounded knob. He pressed it. With a soft, metallic click, the plate shifted. A narrow opening appeared, revealing a dark void beneath. John's breath caught in his throat. He held the lantern closer, its beam piercing the darkness. It wasn't a cavern, but a carefully constructed compartment. And within it, nestled on what looked like faded velvet lining, lay a small, tarnished wooden box. He reached into the compartment, his hand brushing against the surprisingly cool metal. He lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked. its surface smooth with age. The latch was simple but stiff. With a gentle tug, it sprang open. Inside, resting on a bed of what had once been rich fabric, lay a collection of old coins, their metal dulled by time, and a single folded piece of brittle parchment. John carefully picked up the parchment. It crackled as he unfolded it, the ink faded but still legible. It was a letter written in a neat, cursive hand. As he began to read, the story of a hidden legacy, a desperate plea, and a love lost to the harsh realities of the frontier began to unfold. The words on the parchment spoke of a woman named Eleanor, of a hidden fortune meant to secure her future, and of a fear that shadowed her every step. John felt a growing sense of responsibility, a weight settling upon his shoulders. This was no mere treasure. It was a testament to a life, a story that demanded to be heard. John carefully reread Eleanor's letter, the faint scent of aged paper and forgotten lavender filling the night air. The words, though faded, painted a vivid picture of a woman living under the constant shadow of dread. "To whomever finds this," it began, "I entrust this small fortune, hidden away with the hope that it may one day bring security and peace. My husband Silas, a good man but too trusting, fell prey to the greed of others. He amassed this wealth, hoping to build a better life for us, but in doing so, he drew the attention of men who cared nothing for honor or morality." John knew the type. The frontier was a magnet for both the hopeful and the desperate, and the latter often preyed upon the former. "They know of the gold," the letter continued, "and they hunt for it relentlessly. Silas is gone now, taken by a fever that swept through the territory, and I am left alone, vulnerable. I have created this cache as a last resort. The markings on the great stone are a guide, a testament to Silas's cleverness and my desperate hope. The earth will guard it, and I pray it remains hidden until a worthy soul can claim it." Eleanor described her fear of being discovered, of being harmed or robbed. She had buried the box and created the markings, hoping they would be obscure enough to deter the casual seeker, but clear enough for someone with a discerning eye, or perhaps with a touch of intuition, like Daisy's. "If you find this," she pleaded, "and if you are a person of good heart, I implore you to use this for good. It was meant to build, not to destroy. There is enough here to secure a future, to perhaps even build a small sanctuary for those in need. My only hope is that it does not fall into the hands of those who would misuse it. My heart aches with the thought of it fueling more wickedness in this unforgiving land." The letter ended with a plea for anonymity, a desire to remain a ghost in the history of the gold. John carefully folded the parchment, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He looked at the coins, a considerable amount, even in their dulled state, enough to make a difference, enough to fulfill Eleanor's wish. He thought of his own modest homestead, his dream of expanding his ranch, of providing a more comfortable life for himself. But Eleanor's words resonated deeply, a sanctuary for those in need. The words painted an image in his mind, a place of refuge, a testament to kindness in a world often devoid of it. He looked at Daisy, who nudged his hand as if to gauge his mood. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "You knew, didn't you, girl?" he whispered. "You knew this was more than just some old coins." He carefully closed the wooden box, the latch clicking shut with a sound that felt both final and new. He then began the arduous task of refilling the hole, meticulously replacing the dark soil, then the lighter earth, packing it down until it looked as undisturbed as possible. He removed the metal plate, concealing it within the hollow of a nearby rock formation, a secret within a secret. The giant boulder remained, its markings once again almost invisible, a silent guardian of Eleanor's story. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, John mounted Daisy. He looked back at the boulder one last time, a profound sense of purpose settling over him. He wouldn't just be a rancher anymore. He would be a steward of Eleanor's legacy. The journey back to John's homestead was a quiet one, filled with the unspoken weight of their discovery. The rising sun cast a warm, golden light over the prairie, transforming the stark landscape into something beautiful and hopeful. Daisy seemed to walk with a lighter step, as if sensing the positive turn of events. John, however, couldn't shake a persistent unease. Eleanor's letter had spoken of dangerous men driven by greed. He knew such individuals roamed the frontier, their presence a constant threat to honest folk. He had been fortunate that they hadn't found this cache themselves. But what if they were still looking? What if they had known Silas and suspected something more? As they approached his small, sturdy homestead, a modest cabin and a barn surrounded by well-tended fields, John saw a plume of dust rising in the distance. It wasn't the dust of a lone rider. It was the dust of a small group, moving with purpose. His heart gave a nervous lurch. He urged Daisy into a faster pace, his gaze fixed on the approaching riders. They were 3 men, rough-looking, their horses lean and hard-ridden. Their attire was dusty and worn, but the glint of steel at their belts and the hardened set of their faces spoke of a life lived on the edge of the law. John's mind raced. He quickly assessed his meager defenses. His rifle was inside the cabin, but it would take precious minutes to retrieve. He needed to appear calm, unperturbed. He slowed Daisy to a walk as they reached the homestead, his hand resting lightly on the worn leather of his saddle. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, their horses blowing hard. The man in the lead, a burly fellow with a thick, unkempt beard and eyes as cold as a winter frost, surveyed the property with a calculating gaze. "Mornin'," the man grunted, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Heard tell there's a rancher out this way who's come into some fortunate circumstances." John met his gaze, keeping his voice steady. "I'm John Riley. I tend my land, sir. Don't know what you're talking about." The man chuckled, a humorless sound. "Don't play coy with me, rancher. Word travels. Silas Blackwood owed a lot of folks money. And his wife, Eleanor, well, she was always a pretty thing, was she not?" A chill snaked down John's spine. They knew Silas, they knew Eleanor, and they suspected she had hidden something. The connection was clearer and far more dangerous than he had imagined. "Silas died last spring," John said, choosing his words carefully. "Fever took him. Eleanor, she left not long after, went back east, I heard." He knew this was a lie, but it was a necessary one. He couldn't reveal the truth about the box. The bearded man's eyes narrowed, suspicion hardening his gaze. "Left, you say? Funny, we heard she might have left something behind, something valuable." He glanced around the small homestead, his eyes lingering on the barn and the cabin. Seems like a mighty quiet place for someone who's supposedly gone off to greener pastures. His companions shifted in their saddles, their hands hovering near their holsters. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating as the summer heat. John knew this was just the beginning. Eleanor's plea for good use of her legacy was already facing its first, and perhaps most dangerous, obstacle. The tension on John's small homestead crackled like a dry prairie fire. The 3 men, their names revealed as Jedediah, the burly leader, and his associates, Clem and Silas, ironically, lingered, their eyes like hungry predators scanning for weakness. John, ever the pragmatist, invited them inside for a drink of water, a strategic move to keep them within his sight and prevent them from snooping around unsupervised. Inside the humble cabin, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs. Daisy, sensing the unease, remained tethered just outside the open door, her watchful presence a silent comfort to John. He poured water from a pitcher, his movements deliberate, his mind working furiously. "Silas Blackwood," John began, keeping his tone conversational, "was he a friend of yours?" Jedediah spat on the wooden floor, a gesture of disrespect that did not go unnoticed by John. "Friend? Silas owed us, that's what he was. Owed us a considerable sum, and he wasn't the only one." He gestured vaguely towards Clem and Silas, who grunted in agreement. His wife, Eleanor, she was a looker, always had a way about her. Figured she'd know where Silas stashed his ill-gotten gains before he kicked the bucket. John nodded, playing along. I understand you're looking for something, but like I said, Silas and Eleanor are gone. This place hasn't seen much excitement. Clem, a wiry man with shifty eyes, spoke up. Excitement? Or hiding something? We heard Silas was real proud of what he had. Real proud. Said he'd put it somewhere nobody would ever find it. And then his wife disappears right after, like smoke in the wind. The mention of Silas's pride and Eleanor's disappearance solidified John's suspicion. These men weren't just thugs looking for a debt. They were actively hunting for the gold, likely with some insider knowledge, or at least a strong suspicion of its existence. Jedediah leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Now, Riley, we ain't here to cause trouble for an honest man. But if you happen to stumble across anything at all, that Silas might have left behind, it'd be a shame for you to keep it, especially if it ain't yours by right. John met his gaze, his own eyes hardening. He wouldn't be intimidated. I told you, I found nothing. Silas was a decent man, but he kept to himself, and his wife left. That's all I know. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the chirping of crickets outside. Jedediah studied John, his expression unreadable. Then he slowly rose from the rickety chair. All right, Riley, we'll be moving on, but don't think this is the end of it. If we hear anything else, anything at all. He let the threat hang in the air. As the three riders mounted their horses and rode away, John watched them go, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He knew they wouldn't give up easily. Eleanor's plea for a sanctuary was already facing a formidable threat. He needed to protect her legacy, and that meant protecting himself and his homestead from these dangerous men. He had to be smart. He had to be prepared. Days turned into a week, and the shadow of Jedediah and his men loomed large in John's mind. He continued his ranch work, but his senses were on high alert, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon. Daisy, too, seemed more watchful, her ears twitching at the slightest unfamiliar sound. One sweltering afternoon, while mending a fence on the far side of his property, John heard the distinct sound of a wagon approaching. It wasn't the hurried pace of riders, but the steady, rhythmic creak of wheels. As it drew closer, he recognized the wagon and the figure driving it. Martha Jenkins, a widow woman from the nearby settlement of Harmony Creek, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper business acumen. Martha was a formidable woman, a force of nature who had carved out a living as a general store owner and, unofficially, as the community's most astute gossip. She had a way of knowing everything that went on, and usually she wasn't afraid to share her opinions. She pulled her wagon to a halt beside John, her weathered face breaking into a warm, if somewhat stern, smile. "John Riley, you look like you've been wrestling with a badger. Need some supplies?" John, grateful for the distraction and the company, welcomed her. "Martha, good to see you. Just need some nails, I reckon." As he helped her unload sacks of flour and bolts of calico, Martha's sharp eyes took in his demeanor. "You seem preoccupied, John. Everything all right out here?" John hesitated. He trusted Martha, but revealing the truth about Eleanor's gold was a risk he wasn't sure he was ready to take. "Just the usual frontier troubles, Martha. A few unsavory characters passed through a week ago, asking questions." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Unsavory characters, you say? Were they led by a big, hairy brute with eyes like a snake?" John's jaw tightened. They seemed to know Silas Blackwood. Martha let out a puff of indignation. "Jedediah Thorne and his cronies. They've been sniffing around Harmony Creek for weeks, asking about Silas. Always have been. Silas, he had dealings with some bad sorts before he got married. Tried to go straight, they say, but some debts. They don't just disappear." She paused, her gaze sweeping over John's face. "They're looking for Silas's stash, ain't they? Heard whispers about it for years. Some say he squirreled away a fortune before he died." John's heart sank. Martha's knowledge confirmed his fears. The story of the hidden gold was out there, and Jedediah was determined to find it. But Martha's mention of Silas trying to go straight offered a glimmer of hope. Perhaps not everyone believed Silas was a villain. "They asked me about it," John admitted, finally deciding to confide in her. "Said Silas owed them. I told them I knew nothing." Martha's expression softened with a hint of understanding. "You did right, John. Silas was a changed man after he married Eleanor. She was good for him, brought out the best in him." She placed a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You need to be careful, John. Jedediah Thorne is a dangerous man. He won't stop until he finds what he's looking for, but you're not alone in this. If those men bother you again, you let me know. Harmony Creek looks out for its own." John felt a surge of gratitude. In the vast, often solitary landscape of the West, a simple gesture of solidarity from a neighbor could mean everything. Martha Jenkins, with her sharp wit and even sharper sense of justice, had become an unexpected ally. The encounter with Martha Jenkins had provided John with valuable insight into Jedediah's past and motivations. He now understood that Silas's dealings had created a web of dangerous connections that were now reaching out for his legacy. The thought of Jedediah desecrating Eleanor's memory by misusing her hard-won fortune spurred John into action. He decided the safest course of action was to move the gold. But where and how, without drawing attention? He couldn't simply load it onto his wagon and ride into town. Jedediah and his men were likely watching. John spent the next few days devising a plan. He remembered a hidden gully on the far western edge of his property, a place so overgrown and obscure that even he rarely ventured there. It was a perfect spot to temporarily conceal the box. He decided to make the move under the cloak of darkness, a risky endeavor, but one that offered the best chance of remaining undetected. Under the pale light of a sliver moon, John hitched Daisy to a small, sturdy cart. He carefully placed the wooden box, wrapped in a thick canvas tarp, onto the cart. Daisy seemed to sense the urgency of their mission, moving with quiet efficiency through the darkened landscape. The air was cool and still, the only sounds the soft creak of the cart and Daisy's rhythmic hoofbeats. As they neared the gully, John kept his senses sharp, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. He felt a prickle of unease, a nagging suspicion that they were being watched. He dismissed it as nerves, the product of weeks of stress. He reached the gully and carefully maneuvered the cart to the edge. He lowered the box, its weight a familiar burden, and began to bury it deeper, using his shovel to quickly cover it with loose soil and fallen leaves, disguising the disturbed earth as best he could. He then scattered some loose rocks and brush over the spot, making it look as natural as possible. As he worked, he heard it, the faint sound of approaching horses, not the steady pace of Jedediah's group, but a faster, more urgent rhythm. His heart pounded. He quickly finished covering the spot, his hands moving with frantic speed. "Whoa there!" a gruff voice boomed through the darkness. John froze. It wasn't Jedediah. It was a man he didn't recognize, accompanied by two others. They emerged from the shadows, their faces grim and purposeful. One of them held a lantern, its beam cutting through the night, illuminating John and Daisy. "Well, well," the lead man said, his voice cold. "Look what we have here. A lone rancher digging in the middle of nowhere. What are you hiding, Riley?" John's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on Jedediah, he had overlooked another threat. These men were clearly not working with Jedediah, but they were just as dangerous. They had clearly been following him. "Just burying some personal effects," John stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. The man laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Personal effects? In the dead of night? Don't insult our intelligence, rancher. We know about Silas Blackwood's gold, and we know you've got it." John realized with dawning horror that he had walked directly into a trap, or rather, that his attempt to move the gold had inadvertently exposed him to a different set of predators. His attempt to safeguard Eleanor's legacy had just become infinitely more complicated and dangerous. A small, sturdy building began to take shape. It wasn't grand, but it was built with care and purpose. John, no longer just protecting the legacy, was building it brick by brick. One crisp autumn afternoon, the building was complete. A sign above the door, fashioned by the local blacksmith, read, "Eleanor's Haven." Jedediah and his men never found the gold, their greedy pursuit leading them to a dead end before they vanished from the region. Marcus and his crew also disappeared, their attempts to exploit the land foiled. John Riley, the quiet rancher who had listened to the whispers of the stones and the nudge of his horse, had found a new purpose. He had honored Eleanor's memory, transforming a hidden fortune into a beacon of hope. The Old West, for all its harshness, had also given birth to profound kindness and enduring legacies, and John, with the help of his horse and his neighbors, had become a part of one of them.